Praise the Lord, children. Today I am going to tell you the story of Deborah. She is a lady judge, and you can read about her in Judges chapter 4. Now, when the Hebrew people, the Israelites, settled in the promised land, there was a time of peace, a complete peace. God had warned them not to disobey his laws or worship the idols, for this would lead to all kinds of troubles. But what happened? Unfortunately, over time they forgot God, disobeyed his commandments, and began to worship the idols. So, what they have to bear it? As a consequence, they did not live in peace but suffered under the attacks from their enemies. The Israelites were not ruled by a king. Instead, God raised spiritual leaders called judges who did their best to direct the people to serve God. But what happened? When the judge died, people will again return back and act more corruptly, more evil than before. They returned to their stubbornness, disobedient ways, and worshipped the idols instead of God. So God allowed the Canaanite ruled by a king named Jabin. Now, this king had a very strong army with over 900 iron chariots under the command of mighty Sisera. Now, the Sisera was the commander of his army. Okay, and he had cruelty oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They raided and stole their crops, they captured their cattle. Eventually, the people prayed and cried out to God for help. Do you know what it is like to suffer under a cruel people? God hears the prayers of those who suffer. In those days, there was a woman who was a prophetess and she judged over the people. Her name was Deborah, and she lived in the hill country of Ephraim. People were willing to travel up to the hills to get guidance from God. Deborah selected Barak as the leader of the Israelite and said, "The Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor with 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give you victory over him." Barak replied, "I will go, but only if you go with me. If you won't go with me, I won't go." "I will go with you," said Deborah. "But the credit for this victory will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So it was already prophesied that Sisera will be killed by a woman. Sisera, the commander of the Canaanites, heard that Barak gathered together around 10,000 men to fight him at Mount Tabor. He quickly gathered his trained men of war and 900 iron chariots to attack Barak and his group of poorly equipped fighters. Deborah, Barak, and the brave Israelites stood on Mount Tabor and watched below as the Sisera organized his mighty force of chariots near the river Kishon. They grew tensed as they saw this mighty enemies below. How could they possibly fight against such a strong army? Was their question. The sky grew very dark. Then a mighty torrent of rain came. Deborah said to Barak, "Go, the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. The Lord has gone out before you, and you will definitely win the battle." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. The Lord confused Sisera and his chariots as the water in the river Kishon rose to a mighty torrent, flooded the land, and swept many of the army away. Barak tried to pursue the fleeing chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, defeating the whole army. But what happened? Only Sisera, the commander, escaped on foot. He fled in panic, and he was so tired that he came to a tent and saw Jael. Now, who is she? She is the wife of Heber the Kenite. So she said, "Come in, my lord. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent. And this lady, this Jael, she covered him with a blanket. So he said, "I am thirsty. Please give me some water." He begged like anything. But she didn't give him water. She opened the skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' tell them no." And this Sisera, he fell down and slept. So Jael took a tent peg and seized a hammer. She crept up to the sleeping general and drove the tent peg into his forehead with such a force that it went in through the ground. So a woman got the credit of ending the life of this cruel commander, just as Deborah had predicted. The cruel Canaanites and the powerful Sisera were no longer a threat to the Israelite. Barak and Deborah celebrated by singing praise to God. So, by trusting and obeying God, the Israelites then enjoyed 40 years of peace.